We have new details at this hour on a death penalty trial going on in Columbus County Court. A jury could start deliberating James McCammy's sentence tomorrow.
That same jury convicted him of first-degree murder for killing retired teacher Carol Greer. Now, jurors will decide whether to send him to death row or to prison for the rest of his life. WECT's Sydney Hoover is following the sentencing hearing. Sydney, we're expecting closing arguments tomorrow.
Yeah, Fran, then the jurors could begin deliberating as the hearing heads into its third day. McCammy stabbed Greer, a retired teacher, to death in 2016. He also stabbed Rashonta Love the day before, leaving her with severe injuries. Today, the jury heard testimony from a psychologist called by the defense. That witness testified he had conducted a brain scan called a quantitative EEG on McCammy while he was in jail in 2019. He said that scan showed McCammy's brain may have a lower function in the part that controls logic, rationality, and impulsivity. He also said McCammy may suffer from post-concussive syndrome because of a head trauma when he was younger. Prosecutors argued that's not an official diagnosis, and additional tests like an MRI and a CT scan were not conducted to validate that brain scan. Jurors must come to a unanimous decision in order to pass down the death penalty sentence. Otherwise, McCammy will spend the rest of his life in prison. Sydney Hoover, WECT News.